Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us for the July Local Employment Dynamics, or LED webinar. Before I introduce the webinar, let's go over a few housekeeping rules. As mentioned earlier, this webinar is being recorded. For your convenience, it will be uploaded to our Census Academy site with all supplemental materials relating to the webinar within 30 business days. We welcome your questions during the webinar. Please submit your questions using the chat panel. As time allows, we will answer your questions directly through the chat panel, or we will share your questions with the presenter to respond to during the Q&A portion of the webinar. Also, we ask that you do not include any personal or business identifiable information with your questions. We suggest keeping the chat panel open as well. We will be providing key links and other resources throughout the webinar. Keep in mind, you won't be able to respond to the chat directly, but that is for us to send out links and other resources related to the presentation. As you know, we are in a virtual environment and sometimes technical difficulties might occur. If you are having issues, try a different browser or consider logging out and coming back into the session. If you are having audio issues, try selecting the computer audio or calling into the webinar via phone. On behalf of the U.S. Census Bureau and the Local Employment Dynamics Partnership, in collaboration with the Council for Community and Economic Research and the Labor Market Information, it is my pleasure to welcome Elena Volovelsky, Christian Harris, Shital Patel from the New York State Department of Labor as they present using census data to understand workforce trends and labor market dynamics. State workforce agencies need timely local data to address workforce shortages, talent retention, and economic growth. This session demonstrates how the Longitudinal Employer-Household Dynamics tools can be used to estimate underemployment, identify where workers live and commute, analyze median earnings outcomes by education level, and examine the workforce age 65 and older. Attendees will see practical examples of how LEHD data can help identify workforce opportunities and inform strategic investments in education, training, and economic development. With that, I'll hand it over to Christian for more introductions.
Thank you very much. And thank you to the Census crew for giving us the opportunity to speak to this group today. A quick note about how our makeup here at the New York State Department of Labor. All our presenters are under the broad Policy, Strategy, and Research, or PSR division of the New York State Department of Labor. There are 7 work units within the PSR division, 2 of which work with consumer or customers on a regular basis and go to the well as far as LEHD data on the regular. Our one work unit that does use LEHD data on the regular is our New York State Data Center, which is our census experts. They're just an absolutely phenomenal group to help us to understand the data that's in the census. And as we know, it is an ocean of terrific information. They're who we go to when we have a customer looking for information. We believe it to be census related, and they are terrific at guiding us exactly to where we need to be. Our other work unit that works with the LEHD data is our Bureau of Labor Market Information. And in that bureau, we actually have 11 labor market analysts. We have a statewide analyst, Elena Volovelsky, who looks at the big picture items, and we have 10 regional labor market analysts throughout the state. Unique to some states, we are seated right in our area of interest, some of us born and raised, so we do have a really good connection to the community and what's important to them. 3 of those analysts will be presenting today. As mentioned, Elena Volovelsky, she oversees the New York City region. Shital Patel, who oversees Long Island, and me, Christian Harris, who oversees the Southern Tier region of New York State. The Longitudinal Employer-Household Dynamics, or LEHD data set, is one that our division consistently uses to explore that relationship between employers and employees. We have 6 use cases to highlight in our presentation today that take advantage of this LEHD programs. more specifically the origin destination employment statistics, or loads, post-secondary employment outcomes, or PSEO, and quarterly workforce indicator statistics. I'll be managing the slide deck, and Elena Volovelsky in New York City will start us off with a sample question relating to congestion prices in the city that doesn't sleep.
Thank you, Christian. So I am not going to go over what congestion pricing is. If you have any questions about that, you can ask them afterwards. I'll be more than happy to answer what I know of it. But it was a program that had a lot of proponents and a lot of opposition. It was in the works for decades. And one of the questions that we received was, can we measure the impact of congestion pricing on jobs in the area of the business district? So this question was based on the assumptions that congestion pricing would cause people in general to choose not to work in the area in question, and that was 60th Street in the borough of Manhattan and below that. So we couldn't use American Community Survey, and that was because to get characteristics of commuters, we needed to use the public use microdata area files. And we have a residence code to be able to separate people who live above the business district versus below the business district. But the geographic code that we needed to determine where a person works was only available for Manhattan as a whole. So we could produce characteristics of people commuting into that whole entire county of Manhattan, but the place of work wasn't available below the county level. So we turned to LHD, and LHD estimates were available from on the map, and we could get close to the geography that we needed. So people living outside of Lower Manhattan and commuting into Lower Manhattan. So although the LHD data were limited to pre-tabulated characteristics, we were able to get the number of people commuting, an age breakdown, and also some of their income characteristics. So using on the map showed us, this is not on the slide, but using on the map showed us that 89.5% of the people who worked in the area commuted from outside of the business district that was going to be subject to congestion pricing. We also saw that approximately 38% of the workers commuting to the area made $40,000 a year or less, and 62% earned more than that. So it was true that potential impact on the business district was going to be very significant, and it required further investigation, and we deferred this issue for further study. And then in the end, to deal with the possible impact on those in lower income brackets, individuals making less than $50,000 a year were able to get either an exemption from the congestion fee or to receive a refund of the fee while filing their taxes for the year. So that's it for my example, and I'll be happy to take questions at the end.
Okay. Hi, everyone. I am working in the Long Island region for the New York State Department of Labor. So I look at Long Island issues specifically, but sometimes I do some analysis on statewide issues. So this is one of the examples. Back in the summer of 2024, we had taken a deep dive into the job market for recent college graduates. At that time, it seemed like the tide was turning, and there was a lot of press about how there aren't enough college-level jobs for recent graduates, and that many would have to settle for jobs that don't require a college education. The Burning Glass Institute had also recently published a report on that phenomenon, which they dubbed underemployment. And I'm sure you're all aware of that this is still happening. Just as I was preparing for this presentation, I came across an article recently published in Bloomberg that discussed this exact same thing, almost word for word. As I think we're all aware, recent college graduates continue to be underemployed for any number of reasons, including AI, and also a highly uncertain economic environment for both businesses and job seekers that has resulted in that low hire, low fire economy. But anyway, so back to how we used LED data. We decided to use data from the post-secondary employment outcomes, or PSEO, for New York's SUNY and CUNY colleges. We looked at the percent of graduates from the 2019-2021 cohort that wound up in either retail or accommodation and food services industries a year after graduation as a very rough proxy for underemployment. So while it's not really a perfect measure, it did serve as a useful tool to measure the outcomes of different undergraduate majors relative to each other. So we found that overall, 15% of graduates from the SUNY and CUNY system wound up in one of those two industries a year after graduation. We also found that visual and performing arts majors, as well as communication and journalism majors, had the highest rates of underemployment, or at least our measure of it. At the other end, and not very surprising to us, health professions and engineering had among the lowest shares of graduates working in retail or accommodation and food services a year after graduation. For this project, we also took a look at median earnings for the top 10 majors in the SUNY and CUNY system. Again, the data were a bit dated, but it was helpful to see how they ranked relative to each other. I also have continued to use this to show to a variety of our customers, high school guidance counselors, other job counselors. This is a really useful resource to see how majors stack up against each other. But it is also important to note that the picture would vary greatly if students go on to get their master's or PhDs. So that data is also available to see how median earnings are a year after getting higher degrees. Students that pursue higher degrees in business or management fields wind up earning higher annual earnings than other areas of study. I also serve on a few advisory boards at our local colleges, and this is not this chart, but I've used the PSEO flows data to show which industry graduates with specific majors, which industries that specific majors wind up in. So for example, I think students that major in business and management, all sort of expect to find jobs in finance and insurance. But if you look across the SUNY and CUNY schools, most graduates wind up in either professional, scientific, and technical services, and a large number find jobs in healthcare and manufacturing. So I think it's useful for students to see where different people wind up in and help them think a little bit outside the box in their job search. So moving on to a slightly younger cohort, like clockwork, I was asked recently about summer hiring of teenagers on Long Island, specifically 14 to 18-year-olds. I get asked about this almost every year by the press, so a couple years ago I thought I'd take a deeper look. I looked at the third quarter data over time of hires in the industries most impacted by summer seasonality. And it was pretty interesting. Hiring in arts, entertainment, and recreation, educational services, which includes many summer camps run by local schools and colleges, and public administration, which includes summer hiring for our local municipalities. Those have all remained relatively unchanged over time, with the exception of the big dip in educational services in 2020 when many summer camps closed due to COVID. But accommodation and food services, on the other hand, has grown over time, and it peaked in 2021. That industry is a very important part of our regional economy and has increased overall employment over the past decade or so, which has impacted the overall trend of summer hiring over the last decade. However, we did see a big jump in the summer of 2021. And as I think we all know, there was an extremely tight labor market, which opened up a lot of opportunities for younger workers at the same time that restaurants were really hiring at record levels. And finally, for me, the aging workforce is a very big issue for my region of Long Island. Our workforce skews older than even the national average and state average. So when I'm speaking at different events or different constituents, especially where we focus on the trades, the manufacturing industry is a huge area of focus here. And while net employment has been shrinking over the past several decades, the graying of the shop floor is really becoming a huge problem to industry officials. So most recently, about 12% of the workforce is 65 or older, which accounts for more than 8,000 workers. And my audiences are usually bored, but they really do sit up in their chairs when they hear this, because our education systems don't really appear to be churning out enough workers to fill positions vacated by workers as they retire. The share of workers 65 and over in construction isn't as high as manufacturing, but the number of workers nearing retirement has nearly doubled over the last decade. So, that's something that we continue to keep an eye on. And that's all that I have. I'll pass it over to Christian.
Thank you a lot, Shital. Great information. So the question that I get in my office, not on a regular basis, but here and there, is from businesses related to turnover rates. So I think, as we all know, staff turnover can be a very expensive affair. I think a Gallup poll puts a replacement costs at about 50 to 200% of the salary of individuals that are being replaced, depending on what exactly they do. So it is a concern if they do feel that they're churning out a lot of employees, if their turnover rates are seen to be, a little on the high side. So when that question came through to me, my mind immediately went to JOLTS data. So JOLTS data is a federal information out there that's job openings and labor turnover. But as most of us may already know, the national data, there's a good amount of national data, and there is statewide data there as well. Although they have moved from monthly to annual information at the statewide level, but there isn't really localized JOLTS data available. Two of the main gold standards as far as data sources for us are the quarterly census of employment and wages and the census. Very thorough and the most accurate and wide-reaching available. The LEHD program marries these two pieces and gives us data available not deeper than the statewide level. So we can go down to the county level or even workforce development area level and get that information we need. So not only a top side, all industries type of turnover rate, but we can actually break these out by industry category as well. So I had a manufacturer in Chenango County thinking, hey, we seem to be turning over a lot more people than we have in the past. Where do we sit as far as our turnover rate relative to other employers in the area? So I quickly went over to the QWI, Quarterly Workforce Indicators, and pulled the information. So right now you're taking a look. It's a bit of a dated view, but this is a look at not only that turnover rate, but the components of that turnover rate. So we've got people coming into a job with an employer and people leaving. So we have an idea of what's really driving those turnover rates. And as you can see, we can see that information over time. So that'll give us an idea if it is just a broad economic thing, not only manufacturer, but other industries may be experiencing the same thing because of what's going on broadly. Or you can see if you are misaligned, or if a company is misaligned. So the quarterly census of employment and the QWI data is queued up to quarterly information. So we can take a look at a specific quarter. So if an individual wasn't with a firm in the prior quarter and they are now, they would be considered a hire. If they were with that employer and they currently are not, then there would be a separation. If they're consistently with that employer, obviously it would be an employment situation. The QWI also offers a state value. So that takes a look at roughly a 3 to 4 quarter span. So if an individual is with a company for a quarter and then is no longer there for the quarter in question and the following quarter, so that would lead us to believe that it is a stable, or this is an individual that's definitely no longer with that employer. Same goes with the hires. If an individual wasn't with the employer for the previous quarter, and then all of a sudden they are, and they're still with that employer in the subsequent quarter, that would be considered a stable rate. So that gives us an idea if it's just general turn or seasonality. This kind of strips that out to take a look and see what genuinely is going on in the employer. So on the screen here, you can see the general layout of information that's provided by QWI. Many ways to slice and dice this information. You can get into your age cohorts. You can get into your industry categories. You can zoom in on your specific quarters of interest. There is not only quarterly data, but there's annual average data in here as well. We can take a look at these hiring rates, or we can take a look at the actual counts of hiring and replacement and separations. And then like I said, the turnover rate is what they were most interested in. And so I was able to move this along to them and satisfy their need. It may not be a complete, like a perfect match to how they do it. Obviously they're tracking individuals pretty closely. But it is a good approximation to let them know what the industry as a whole is doing as far as turnover rates. So we not only have this really nice visual display, but the data is also available with this visual display. This data can be downloaded and taken a look at and used for other visualizations to better understand what's going on, if it's truly economic, or if it's unique to an individual business. So that was my entree into the QWI, one that I, like I said, I get from time to time from employers. Not too long ago, our executives here challenged us to put together some more thorough research papers. So we took a look at what's out there, what's hot out there as far as topics go. Demographics, tariff impacts, AI, and turnover rates. We wanted to explore a little bit more deeply. We wanted to know what all this wonderful data that the census provides is going to tell us about New York State specifically as it relates to other geographies. So I was able to pull together a team. What we wanted to take a look at was comparing these turnover rates across geographies and time. So we want to compare to the nation or other states. Maybe dig a little bit deeper. There is county level data, but if you get a real small county, sometimes the information's a little sporadic as far as confidentiality rules. But they do offer workforce development area data, and that is pretty thorough, and most of that information is available. And obviously, we want to take a look over time to see, hey, are we moving upwards, downwards, what's going on here, and try to come up with a reason as to why the data is moving the way it is. As I mentioned before, we can slice and dice these by broad industry categories. So you want to take a look at these industries and compare them and see what's going on, and see if we can come up with an idea of why that would be happening. So obviously we did as much as we could as far as interpreting these differences in turnover rates. So what we used for this were stable quarterly workforce indicators. In fact, we went even further and used a 4-quarter average. And why we used the stable and did the 4-quarter average was to try to pull out as much seasonality as possible. We wanted to tell a real economic story. And so applying both of these things helped us to really nail down any sort of real impactful trend that's going on. I do need to mention that our majority of states are participating in this and have timely data out there. 2 states do not, Alaska and Michigan. But we are still able to pull, the census is still able to pull national information or put national information out there because obviously we have the majority of the states' data out there. So the first look we wanted to take a look at is how do we compare to the nation? How does New York State compare to the nation? So I was able to pull that information. Again, these are 4-quarter averages. At the time I pulled this, 2024 Q2 was the most timely, I believe. As far as stable QWI, I think we're up through Q1 of 2025 now. So as you can see here, New York State has been below the national rate since as far back as we're able to compare back to 2001. So that's interesting information and something that we can pass along to others. As far as the reasons for the differences, they're varied. There isn't one specific culprit, but there's a number of things that we can identify that would keep individuals in jobs a little bit more sturdily than the nation as a whole. So now we want to take a look at industry categories. So this is a breakout of the annual job turnover rate, or over the 4-quarter average, the turnover rates by industry category. And at the highest here is the arts, entertainment, and recreation industry. And taking a look at the meat of this, you can. We also added the all industry category, so we can use that as a bellwether as far as performance goes. Largely, this is a relationship between average wages paid. You'll see those with a higher turnover rates are typically those that pay below the average, and those with a lower turnover rate have a higher payday associated with them on average. So that wasn't too surprising, but it gives you concrete evidence of that impact. Now we wanted to take a look at, we've got the industry data for the state, we've got the industry data for the nation. How are we tracking by industry category? And we were able to take a look at that and look at that difference for the most recent data set or data span available. And we saw that 4 of our industry categories tracked above the national. Both education services and management of companies slightly, maybe nominal, compared to the top 2 here. Transportation and warehousing showed up to be a pretty sizable difference from the nation. And digging further into the data, we actually saw that it was an administrative change. So it was better reporting from employers in this specific time period that caused that gap. And that before and after one specific quarter, this narrowed substantially. So that gave us information. First, there was a concern, hey, what's going on in transportation and warehousing in our area? But we see that it was administrative change that actually caused that gap. And information is an interesting industry segment for us. In the city, there's huge competition between the information sector and the finance sector. So we have a lot of talent moving back and forth. We know that these two are interwoven so deeply, especially with the burgeoning of AI. So we're actually seeing some job jumping going on between that, and it's mainly in the city that's driving this gap, why we're having a little bit higher turnover rate in our information sector. And you can see along the bottom here where we have the least turnover in our admin and support, well, not least turnover, least relative to the nation, our admin support, real estate, rental and leasing, and the ag. So now we want to look, we know where we stand against the nation. Let's see what's driving this national information. Let's see what's going on in other states. Here's a chloropleth map, it's a hard word to say, of all the nations and their turnover rates. You can see the NAs in Alaska and Michigan, but you can see the difference between the high and the low is only about 3.7%. So it isn't a huge gap. between the high and the low. Our low is in Pennsylvania, our high in Wyoming, or is in Colorado, I believe. So this gives us interesting information, especially for New York State. When we look at one of our neighboring states and seeing it 8.3%, not huge, but hey, what's going on there? And we can see other states surrounding us and try to get a grasp on why they're having more success, why they're having less success, if we want to go any further. So as I mentioned, there is county data as far as QWI goes, but your smaller counties tend to have not a whole lot of detail. They may have a topside number, but our workforce development area information is pretty rigorous and full as far as QWI data goes. So we're able to break out our workforce development areas throughout the state. Again, our gap here may be a little bit bigger, 7.5% to 10.2%. The range is obviously below okay, so we can see that our on the lower end, that 7.5% is down in the Long Island area, and our 10.2% looks to be just above our Hudson Valley area. So again, we can dig a little bit deeper, take a look at the industry detail, and that may lead us to some conclusion as to why certain areas may have a little bit higher turnover rates. You can take a look at what specific industries are driving that. So that's essentially it for me. I know there's probably a lot of questions out there. We hopefully will have that turnover report out there on our website once completed for those to view. With that, I guess I'll turn it over if there are any questions.
Thank you, Elena, Christian, and Shital. Before we get to the questions, and as a reminder, the presentation will be accessible on the Census Academy website at census.gov/academy under the webinar within 30 days. The links have been added to the chat. Again, type all of your questions in the Q&A box and keep your questions pertaining to the presentation. The chat has been disabled to our attendees. First question, connecting to the first example that looked at the residential locations of people in certain businesses and districts, I'm looking to pull data from Illinois, but when I compare the total jobs in the OD files versus the WAC files, they have different values. Did you deal with this, or do you have any sense of why this could be?
Yeah, so the actual pulling of the data, we had our data center team do that. But if you email me, I'll be happy to connect you to them, and they'll be able to answer the more technical questions.
Thank you. I'm interested in examining employment in my county's agricultural sector, and I was wondering how you can rule out jobs with seasonality and turnover trends within a sector using QWI. I believe it was mentioned, but I missed what the presenter said.
So yeah, I would head over to the stable, so that will take a look across 3 quarters at least. And then if you were to take an average over like 4 quarters, it may kind of tamp down that seasonal movement a little bit more. Those were the 2 tricks that we did, or 2 things that we did to try to pull out the seasonal movement and try to look at like a strong economic movement.
How confident are you of the data quality that feeds into QWI? For context, job numbers for the past 8 months have been revised downwards.
I know that we explore it on the regular. We make sure to lay it against any sort of other industry data, any sort of QCEW information, and we've been pretty happy with how well it's aligned. That's been my experience, at least.
Yeah, same here. We compare this to QCW data regularly, and it exhibits the same trends. So, when we're looking at the jobs numbers, the revisions are based on a survey, and then once a year, these data are benchmarked. So they're actually compared to the administrative records of the companies that pay into the unemployment insurance funds. So that's what we call QCW, the quarterly census of employment and wages. And those data, the quarterly data, those are not a survey. Those are actual administrative records. So, when you're looking at that, those are actual records. So not, they're not revised up or down. So that's a more reliable indicator.
And that is an important point. Like I mentioned, pivot to JOLTS right away when someone says something about turnover rate, but that's a completely optional voluntary survey. It gives you great information, definitely at the national level. But when we're using QCEW or census information, both of which are, the QCEW is legally required. Census information is very thorough. Those are two really good, solid, gold standard type information sources.
Do you, New York Department of Labor, use Census Bureau data tools or other tools such as R with an API?
We're getting further and further into it, yes. Our state data center is absolutely involved in that, and the labor market analysts are moving into that as well.
What is PwC?
Great question.
I think do you mean QCW? The QCW is the quarterly census of employment and wages, as I had just mentioned before. But PwC, I'm not quite sure.
Yeah, I think they probably meant QCW.
That's essentially any employer out there who takes advantage of unemployment insurance. They're required by law to give quarterly employment and wage information. And it's roughly about 97% of the working population out there. You'll get mom and pop shops that may not, some small farms that may not pull into that specific data set. That will be, maybe that information would be pulled in by the census or some other survey. But it is a hearty source of information for business employment and wage information.
For someone new to using census data to explore workforce trends, what are some easy to understand indicators or reports to identify high demand industries, demographics within those industries, and educational outcomes in a region?
Well, the website has very easy to use tools. So you can select your state, and then if you want to look at specific counties, you can pick those counties, and then pick the different industries that you're interested in looking at, and you will automatically see a chart of either age demographics. So like I mentioned, that's a really big area of interest here on Long Island. You can look at the racial makeup of different industries to see information on that. With respect to educational outcomes, there's another page on the website for the PSEO. And that also has a really great tool where you can just pick your state and either see a total of all the different colleges and universities that are a part of the system. Or you could pick specific colleges that you're interested in looking at, and then you can look at outcomes by major. You can look at either median wages 1, 5, or 10 years after graduation. You can look at the industries that they wound up in, or even the region. That's not something I discussed, but that's also on there. So it's really worth just going in there and playing around. It's very easy to use. You don't have to download the data if you don't want to. You can really just pull everything up with the different tools that they have on their website.
And if you do need a census data Sherpa, like I said, New York State has a data center specific. So states do have data centers, or I would contact their labor market information shop. We can help guide you. Not just New York State, but all states will have labor market information shops.
New York State has a very comprehensive data website. Is there any other states like yours?
There is. We're constantly looking at each other's websites and stealing ideas. So yeah, I think that does drive us to improve. New York State specifically, we switched over from just cold tables to dashboards, and that's been pretty productive. We're using Tableau as our data display, so we have even more information out there, but any user can go in there and filter down specifically, or it gives you curated views that may pique your interest or may drive you that way. So yeah, I want to say that we're the best out there, but that's very self-aggrandizing. A lot of the states are constantly trying to put more information out there and make it more user-friendly.
Yeah, I was going to say there is no state like New York. So, but yeah, once we started using Tableau, that really sort of opened up the opportunity to post so much more data than we had been. So I don't specifically know the states that are using it, but yeah, that sort of really was the big point that we went from, just like Christian was saying, having static tables to really being able to post large amounts of data.
Does Tableau have a direct link to the data, or do you import the data?
Import.
Yeah.
Okay, we're giving it another 30 seconds to see if we have any more questions. I also want to say that on the LEHD website, we have an area for state partners where you can go and look, and then you can pull up every single state partner's website. That's under lehd.ces.census.gov, and then under the state partners tab. Okay, going once, going twice. Ah, got me. 2 questions came in.
Thank you very much for all of your hard work.
Okay.
That's a statement.
And then,
can you put the LEHD link in the chat?
Yes.
So yes, we will.
And also on the LEHD site, for all of our different data tools, they have an area where you can, we have tutorials on how to use all of our data tools. So they are very intuitive. It's so easy to use. It's been 16 years, but at the beginning I self-taught myself. So if I can do it, anybody can do it. So anyway, any more questions out there? All right. So I'm going to close this out then. So I just want to say thank you, everyone, for joining us this afternoon. And thank you to Elena, Christian, and Shital for their outstanding presentation. Would any of you like to make any closing remarks?
No, I don't think so. Thank you for having us.
Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, great. So this concludes the July LED webinar. Join us on August 19th at 1:30 p.m. Eastern Time when Evan Johnston, Reese Nethery, and John Caras from TIPS Research and Development present Connecting Jobs and Walkability with Census Data. Upon exiting this webinar, you will receive a pop-up to an evaluation. We would appreciate that you take the time to answer the questions so we may better serve you in the future webinars. On behalf of the U.S. Census Bureau and the LED Partnership, thank you for joining us today and enjoy the rest of your afternoon.